As we speak, let me take with me Ambassador Nabil Badr, former Assistant Foreign Minister and Head of the European Department of the Egyptian Council for Foreign Affairs. Good evening to you, Ambassador Nabil.
Good evening to you.
Yes, we're speaking about the upcoming, or rather tomorrow's, big event of the Russia-Africa Summit, which is taking place for the first time in the history of both regions. And here I have to speak about the timing that this summit comes within, and what are we expecting to that this summit would bring?
Well, it's really quite interesting. As you know, Africa, if we take it generally speaking, has been the platform attracting world powers, being the continent of the future, as it has been termed. Now, after a long period of colonization, Africa is still fresh, young by its population, with certainly tremendous economic potential which exists, which has been discovered, and which is still coming up, and actually offers lots of chances. Now, in the last decade or so, we have seen very important conferences taking place. China, of course, was a pioneer. The European Union also participated. Japan was not outside that game. And certainly today's meeting in Russia represents the comeback of Russia, if I might say, to the African continent in the new era. Russia, as a matter of fact, was not very far from Africa in very important phases of its history. If you remember the old Soviet Union, during the phase of independence, Russia played an important role with many of these countries. Another element which is still important is the involvement of Russia in the defense industries, defense equipment, training, and what goes with that as well. Of course, it has not been far from the economic developments as well. But today, the meeting in Sochi, if we might take a broad title to it, we might say the comeback of Russia to Africa, the new Africa and the new Russia in economic terms, new discoveries in the potential and the chances of economic and technical cooperation. The participation of Egypt is quite important. Reasons are quite clear. Not only that Egypt is a gateway in that sense, but as a matter of fact, what is very important is that Egypt has a vision, which it has presented lots of times on lots of occasions by the political leadership, and it centers around the African unity, African interdependence, and the interpretation of that in terms of economic cooperation, extending transportation, creating free zones, duty-free, and economic blocks. Probably the most important, as we witness today, is the one in the east, the COMESA, in the south, SADC, and in the west as well, the ECOWAS.
Yes,
of course,
Ambassador
there are other groups in Central Africa as well. Now, that vision certainly needs as well and extend the hand to external help. Russia says it's ready to help. The conference as such is a big chance where all the participants will bring forth not only their priorities, their requirements, and would at the same time lay the background of cooperation in which Russia and other parties can participate as well.
But Egypt is not just, or I mean, yes, definitely Egypt has always had a vision and put Africa, particularly in the recent years, as a priority. But this time Egypt also is a co-host to the summit in its capacity as the head of the African Union. And hence we have to really speak about two important events. We're speaking about a summit and we're speaking about economic forum. So how far do you think that this summit carry a kind of significance in terms of emerging situations, particularly in Africa? And definitely we're speaking also about part of the Middle East or the Northern African countries.
I think that the summit would eventually come out with a declaration, an important one, which will highlight the common interests of Africa and where they join also the interests together, African, and together opening up to the world and welcoming Russia's readiness to participate in African economic development, technical, in lots of domains. They might highlight in that perspective their priorities. We have issues like the infrastructure, rebuilding the African, or helping rebuilding the African infrastructure in lots of domains. We can talk about education. There must be a lot of talk about technical cooperation as well, and about the potential to move to using the African raw materials in industries which are located in Africa with technical help and with capital in which Russia can participate.
Yes.
A lot, I think, should depend, after these generalities, on what would the interpretation and turning these general terms into real action would come to. Here we can talk about the follow-up, that's number one. Number two, if there are any sort of executive formats the participants can agree upon, and whether that executive format can be within the African Union itself, or should be something independent, or something which can be tied up to one of the organs working under the umbrella of the African Union. And thirdly, of course, the bilateral relationship will bring a very important role in that perspective. Of course,
Right.
generally speaking, after highlighting that, we can expect that things will move eventually better than they have done up to this moment. I must here, in spite of all of that, I might also consider that a lot of competition, this sort of cooperation will be faced to. Reasons are clear. There is a lot of competition on the African Union, but that's not going to hinder that cooperation.
Yes.
But we also must shed light on it. As you know, we have participants from all the world trying to use the African platform and potential in their best interest. Russia has tried before the conference in a statement in which President Putin said that the Russian cooperation with Africa is not colonial, it's not a one-sided
Yes,
win
definitely, it's
party.
different.
No, it's a win-win sort of equation. In
Yes.
other words, he has stressed that the quality of the Russian potential, according to his statement, looks forward to Africa wins, Russia wins, no interference in the political internal structure of an African state or against an African interest.
Right.
This is, of course, important to be directed to a continent which has suffered for a long time from colonial rule, which is still suffering from the consequences of that, and which still, up to this moment, in lots of its relationships, does not enjoy the even and the fair treatment certainly it is entitled to.
Right, right. Ambassador Nabil Badr, former Assistant Foreign Minister and Head of the European Department at the Egyptian Council for Foreign Affairs, we thank you so much for being with us and for your